thank you for joining us for today's important session, Strengthening Corporate Values, Growth, and Trust. Today's session, again, will be interactive, so we do request your participation. You can begin now with taking time to share where you're from in the chat. Feel free to place your city and state in the chat. Today's session is webinar 2 of a 3-part webinar series on DEI rebranding, and I'll share more details at the end of the presentation. Next slide, please. So let's start with a brief introduction to Elation Communications. We are a leading consultancy specializing in DEI rebranding, strategic messaging, and corporate transformation. Our work is rooted in helping organizations navigate change, remain compliant, and strengthen brand identity in today's evolving business and regulatory environment. Our mission is simple and powerful. We aim to deliver strategic, results-driven communication solutions that empower brands, enhance stakeholder engagement, and drive measurable business outcomes through innovation, integrity, and excellence. And to achieve this, we developed a DEI rebranding service to meet the current needs of organizations for aligning communications with culture, compliance, and impact. We believe that effective messaging, especially around DEI, drives both internal unity and external reputation. Next slide, please. So why do industry leaders trust Elation Communications? Simply because we have a proven expertise in branding strategy and corporate communications, a deep understanding of the regulatory and compliance landscape, and we offer customized solutions for culture building and growth. We also have a track record of delivering measurable results. We partner with our clients to build brands that stand strong even in uncertain times. Our integrated services support your organization's full communications journey. We reshape corporate narratives for inclusivity and regulatory compliance. We help align teams and leadership around a shared DEI vision. We guide messaging around politically sensitive or disruptive issues. We help you tell your story in a way that resonates with your mission and values, and we equip your leaders with the knowledge and tools to act. Next slide, please. So before I introduce our speakers today, I want to take time to acknowledge where our guests, our audience is from. So welcome. We have people from Raleigh, North Carolina, from Fredericksburg, Virginia, from Washington, D.C. And if you're still adding to the chat, please do so, and we'll acknowledge you a little later on. Thanks again for being with us today. So I'm thrilled to introduce our expert panel who will guide us through strategies that align corporate values, advance growth, and cultivate trust for sustaining a strong DEI commitment in this dynamic climate. We're honored to have with us 3 dynamic leaders, and I'll start with myself, Jerrica Thurman. I am a branding, communications, and crisis management expert specializing in strategic growth and nonprofit leadership. As president and CEO of Elation Communications, I drive brand development, storytelling, and impactful partnerships. With a track record of strengthening organizations, I have excelled in enhancing visibility, managing reputational challenges, and navigating crisis with strategic solutions. As a published author and speaker, I seek to leverage my CAE, MBA, and communications expertise to shape innovative industries, empower leaders, and drive results. We also have the esteemed Dr. Meredith Beckford-Smart, who is the founder and chief visionary officer for InspireU. She is a sustainability expert dedicated to advancing initiatives aligned with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. With nearly 2 decades of nonprofit leadership, she drives equity, innovation, and sustainable impact through strategic programs and consulting. She holds a PhD in science education and supervision from Columbia University, an MA in teaching and learning biology from New York University, and a BS in biology from Long Island University. She also holds an advanced certificate in executive leadership from Cornell University. Combining her expertise in education, organizational transformation, and holistic well being, she empowers communities and organizations to create lasting change. We also have the trailblazing Dr. Claire Nelson, who is a global futurist and sustainability engineer named on Forbes as one of top 50 female futurists in the world. The author of the game-changing book, Smart Futures for a Flourishing World, a paradigm shift for achieving global sustainability, and a keynote speaker, she is a board member of the World Future Studies Federation and the editor at large of its flagship magazine, Human Futures. An award-winning multi-hyphenate, the convener of the Space Futures Forum, and architect of National Caribbean American Heritage Month. She holds a doctorate in engineering management from George Washington University and is honored as a White House champion and a trailblazing advocate for equity. We're so happy to have both Dr. Smart and Dr. Nelson with us today. I also would like to acknowledge my colleague Gigi Shepard from Elation Communications. She will be moderating the chat. Together, we bring a wealth of experience and insight to today's conversation. So before we move on, please share 3 topics in the Q&A tab that you would like to discuss today. And at the end of the presentation, we'll address your questions. Next slide, please. So I'm excited to dive into today's topic. Again, I'd like to just focus a little bit more on Dr. Nelson's book. We'll explore Smart Futures framework that's highlighted in this book, which is a visionary work by Dr. Nelson. This book is more than a call to action. It's a guide to reimagining the future of our world through the lens of sustainability, equity, and intelligent design. We are currently at a critical tipping point. Climate change, widening inequality, technological disruption, and global uncertainty are reshaping our world. Dr. Nelson argues that traditional development models are no longer enough. To truly flourish, we must shift the paradigm toward futures that are not only sustainable, but meaningful and just. So, Dr. Nelson, could you please share more about why you published this book during the height of COVID in 2021?
Thank you so much for the opportunity to share my vision. I want you to imagine 2021 and where we were in a stage of fear. And I'm getting a call from a publisher called Changemaker Books, who is looking to find people who have ideas that could transform the world, a big idea. And so I finally got an opportunity to put what I've been talking about for many years, that we have to move away from just seeing, oh, we have a smart car, a smart house, smart buildings, and we are operating as basically, well, let's be nice, not so smart. And I thought that what if we as humans were to become smart and move away from our perilous drive to throw ourselves over the cliff of technological dystopia and move right or left, because technically speaking, we really can't go backwards in time. And so the book represents my vision of how we can intentionally design and implement technologies and systems that serve humanity's highest aspirations, rather than letting technological developments dictate our future without any consciousness direction. It really represents my belief that we are co-creators of life, and the power to create begins with the word. In the beginning was the word, and the word was made flesh. And so I wanted to help people learn how to craft the future they want to live in. In other words, I wanted to help people tell a better story of where they want to go, and in so doing, arrive at that future.
Thank you, Dr. Thank you, Dr. Nelson. Before we dive into the Smart Futures framework, we would like to take this time to poll the audience to see if you've heard about the Smart Futures framework and whether you are applying it within your organization. So please take time to answer this question. Which element of the Smart Futures framework do you believe is the most critical for driving sustainable change in your organization? Let's see. So we'll give you one more, maybe 2 more seconds, and we'll see the results of the poll. Okay, we're ready for the results. Okay, so the popular response is meaningful metrics, tracking impact and progress. All right, well, that's wonderful insight for today's discussion. Next slide, please. So let's take this time now to dive deeper with the panelists. I will propose this question to the panelists for them to both respond. How can the Smart Futures framework be leveraged to design a sustainable future that prioritizes diversity, equity, and inclusion? Next slide, please.
Okay, so the Smart Futures framework really is about a design framework to think about how you design your processes, policies, products, programs, plans. I saw it as a one-size-fits-all question or framework, but you have to interpret it based on the industry or the sector or the level of organizational or systems change you want to make. Ideally, we're talking about a framework for looking at the systems in which we live and identifying how our particular action impacts on that system. So we're talking about sustainable systems. In this case, many of you here are working as association leaders for industries which are either product-based industries or service-based industries, and those industries are themselves a system of systems. And so always, depending on what you're looking at, in the case of DI, we're talking about DI from the perspective of human resources, or in terms of board governance, or in terms of your customer service base, then we're talking about what systems are you trying to impact in that space. The equity of pay structures, for example, the inclusion of who is at the table and who is not in terms of your governance. But the system that you're trying to change is the first question you ask. You move from there to the metrics that you want to measure. So again, if I'm looking at the issue of the whole society, I love to talk about the metric of well-being. I so desperately want us as humans to move from just profits. And indeed, in the sustainability framework, we're looking at metrics that talk about well-being of people, planet, and profits. Well-being meaning economic well-being, personal well-being, social well-being, all the other things. And some of you may have heard, for example, of the gross national happiness. What if indeed, rather than a gross national product, or the stock exchange every day, oh, the stock market is up, the stock market is down. What if indeed we had a social market that measured our gross national happiness as a country? So what is the metric we want to measure when we're talking about DI? We have, unfortunately, in some cases, looked at DI more as a bean counting. Oh, how many people of this type have we hired? Or how many people of that type have we served? But that's not the purpose of DI when we're talking about corporate values. DI was always meant to be about ensuring that we meet the highest levels of productivity and profitability. We're talking about becoming or being high performance organizations. And so looking at that metric, we want to ensure that the DI metric is supporting the values of people, planet, and profit that go into making a high-performance organization, which leads us to, well, who exactly are relevant to the organizations? Who are the agents in that system? You have the agents who are your employees, your internal agents. They need to have their well-being taken care of. Then there's your consumers who are buying your product or service. And then, of course, there are the stakeholders in the outside world. Whether you're in a regulated industry, then you have the regulators who might be weighing in. You have the communities. If you have an industry that's into building factories and creating waste, you have the economic and the physical environment where the actual industry is. So you have all these agents, and you have to make sure that you look at your DI framework. Who is being disadvantaged? who is being privileged by the product or the policy or the process. And so you look at it from the perspective of each of stakeholders. In engineering, we talk about a complete life cycle analysis of the environment you want to look at. Resilience. Always, if you're designing something to change, recognize that nothing in life ever goes exactly the way you thought. Sometimes you're lucky and you get a force that supports you to move forward in the direction you want to go at just the right pace that you don't overshoot and crash and burn. But unfortunately, many times we are faced with a frictional force that actually prevents us from moving forward. And so we have to look at resilience. And right now, I think is a good opportunity to look at how resilient were the systems we had designed in the first place. If this current climate, which is anti-talking about DI, that doesn't say it's anti-DI, anti-talking about DI as if it's a four-letter word, it's actually a three-letter word. The point is that we have to be resilient and say, how do we do now to reconfigure what we've been using as a brand to still do what we value to ensure our continued growth and trust? Because at the end of the day, if you're going to be a successful industry, company, organization, and you're running an association, a community of institutions or organizations, as a system of systems, you want to make sure that the community that you represent has the resilience built in. And finally, transformational technology. This is a very important question because all of us right now, for example, are faced with this AI. Is it a beast? Is it a burden, or is it a beauty? That is a good question, and each of us will have to define that for ourselves. And you define it based on how you manage the use of the technology and how you use it to drive the achievement you want. And remember, as I said before, too often in the past, we have seen DIs that check the box, look good, a performative action. But for those of us whose companies and industries have really taken it to heart and recognize that there is profitability and increased productivity, and indeed they have become better performing organizations because of DI, we'll want to see now, how do I use the technology that's now available to me to ensure that we are driving our DI metrics, whether they be the metric around employee satisfaction, customer service, environmental impact on the communities where you are serving or building your product. These are ways in which you can use this framework. And as I said, the framework is a series of questions, but you have to define the question to suit the environment in which you are embedded.
Thank you, Dr. Nelson. You know, when I began reading Smart Futures for a Flourishing World, I found myself genuinely curious and wondering, how can 5 strategic questions guide us to what no longer serves us and help reframe how we see the world? That question stuck with me as I continued to read. What I loved was how the book took us on this journey, time traveling from the COVID pandemic in 2020 to 2100 and then back to 2030. It wasn't just a theoretical exercise. It helped me see the Smart Futures framework in action. I was able to envision the real world applications of this in our community and organizations. But what really became clear for me is that the framework is more than just a tool. It's a complete shift in how we solve problems. It challenges the short-term mindset that is often prevalent in organizational culture. Instead, I had an opportunity to look at how it pushes us to adopt futures thinking grounded in interdependence and transgenerational responsibility. You know, what is it about designing not just for one quarter or one year, but how do we look forward for the futures to come, like my grandson, right? And this is precisely where diversity, equity, and inclusion became essential. The Smart Futures framework helps us embed DEI not just as an add-on, but as a foundational element of how we imagine and shape the future. The M in SMART, which stands for moral metrics, for me, struck a chord. It challenges us to rethink how we define success. Instead of just asking, did we hit our numbers like you're saying? We also need to ask, did we create belonging? Did we expand access? And are our outcomes fair and just? These are just the kinds of questions that move us toward meaningful equity. And then I looked at anticipatory agency. This is where the framework becomes empowering. And it's about ensuring that communities have the voice, tools, and power to shape the future. It's a shift from reactive inclusion to proactive transformation. We're not just inviting people in, we're co-creating futures with them. So this framework offers a novel approach to thinking, planning, and action. It helps us reimagine leadership, redefine what impact means, and most importantly, recenter humanity in our work, which is what most of us do in our mission-driven organizations. Ultimately, this is a significant shift from problem solving that's fast, fragmented, and short-sighted to futures thinking that is thoughtful, inclusive, and profoundly transformational. And that's how we begin to design a world that truly flourishes and increase productivity for our organizations and also prosperity for everyone. And Dr. Nelson, I appreciate your storytelling. I love Brother and Nancy stories, which has left me hopeful and excited about an inclusive future.
Thank you, Dr. Smart and Dr. Nelson. Dr. Smart, thanks for highlighting the distinctive storytelling approach at the heart of the Smart Futures framework. So I'd like to ask Dr. Nelson more about it. Could you share what inspired you to ground this literacy piece in storytelling? What was it about narrative that felt essential to conveying the vision behind Smart Futures?
You know what I said in the beginning was the word. Indeed, we are actually wired for stories. And I know this for sure. Crafting a powerful story about the future that you want to create is like writing a blueprint for actually having it being created. You see, first of all, our brain on storytelling, we have a lot of different parts that line up. And if you read the literature on storytelling in business and all the storytelling coaches out there doing business, right? You will learn that a story provides vision and clarity. It helps the process of narration, helps you to create goal setting in a way that your brain can absorb it easier. It helps you, if you write your story correctly, deal with the action planning. But also, more importantly, it gives you this motivation, perseverance, because most times you're trying to make a change. It's not going to be an overnight success. You're going to have to make it stick. And so stories stick where data don't. Stories stick where data doesn't. All right. It makes, as I said, this idea of agency and keeping hope alive. But more importantly, if you write a future story of what you're trying to get to, it helps you bridge from now to there. And at the time I was writing this book, for example, we found a lot of companies, big foresight entities were doing future scenarios, where we're going to go from here. And we had the typical four scenario output where we'll have, okay, collapse on one end or transformation or business as usual. And the question is, I truly believe that associations like yours, and I talk about this idea of tribes in my book. Associations like yours is a sort of a tribe of a particular industry, right? You're different companies, maybe even sometimes competing companies, but you're in the same association because altogether the political environment, the regulatory environment demands that you come together, at least in this one instant, to drive the rules around engagement. And so as you think about the future of your industry, where it's going, where it wants to go, I think one of the things that you as an association leader can think about is, what is the story that we'll be telling as good ancestors 10, 20 years from now? Will I look back at this moment in time when everything was changing, right? Since COVID, we really haven't settled down, if you will. Everything is still changing. AI is moving so fast. What story are you going to tell in 2030, 2045? When AI is supposed to become human-like? Are you going to be a good ancestor because you will have seeded the work now in your work in telling a powerful story that is about ensuring that everybody has a seat at the table, that the values of your company, the values of the industries that make up your organization that already motivate or are motivated by diversity, equity, and inclusion were kept alive by a new reframing of this, not just as a performative check the box, but as an embedded part of our DNA is that we recognize that without it, we're not going to meet the goals of a high performance organizations. And I think writing stories about that, as opposed to focusing on data, will be much more useful to actually helping you to get there.
Okay, Dr. Nelson. So the M in your SMART acronym stands for meaningful metrics, which is a great connector to the next phase of this conversation about the ESG framework. So let's explore the environment, social, and governance drivers. Next slide, please. Okay, so before we move into the discussion, we'd like to poll the audience again to gain an understanding if you are applying ESG frameworks to your business operation. So please take time to respond to this poll. How well is your organization integrating DEI goals into its broader ESG strategy? Okay, so we'll give you a few more seconds to respond and we'll review the results. Okay, let's see the results, please. All right, interesting. 44% has stated not yet integrated DEI and ESG or treated separately. All right, so that is great insight for next part of the discussion today. Next slide, please. So let's now discuss what role does an ESG framework play in shaping a modern DEI strategy, and how can organizations practically integrate these into their long-term business goals? Next slide, please.
When when we think about ESG and how it came into being around 2015, there was a flurry of activities that corporations began to buy into the global SDGs. Corporations began to realize, oh my God, we might run out of water. If we don't have clean water, then what? If we don't have biodiversity, then what? If we don't have energy, if the energy is killing us, then what? So a lot of companies began to move towards ESG, environment, social, and governance metrics as a part of their investment strategy, right? So there are wholesale companies and organizations that so all they do is help organizations do this. So E stands for environmental stewardship, social responsibility, the S, and governance standards, your ethics, your board structure, compensation, those kinds of things. So most of DI would fall under social responsibility, although I would say a little bit might tip into governance and also into environment. But if you look at DI from the point of view, let's say, of your human resources, then definitely, because you tend to have to report on things like your labor practices. You tend to have to report on things like community relations and how you treat the people. Again, the well-being of the people that work for you, as well as the well-being of the people who are impacted by your product, right? So you have a social responsibility if you're knowingly putting, if you happen to be in an industry, let's say, that makes a food product or a personal product that goes on your skin, etc. You have a responsibility to ensure that that does no harm to all the different people that might have to use it. You have to do the work, the research. And so in that sense, DI could also go into somewhat of the environmental stewardship piece of it, if you're looking at it from the point of view of your consumer base or the stakeholders that live in the footprint of your factory or live in the footprint of, even I found out recently that the people who live in the footprint of the data mining industry, the blockchain mining industry, are suffering from the sound, the high-pitched noise that comes from these data servers. Who would have thunk that's also a problem? So environmental disasters is not only dirty water, it's also noise, right? And governance standards as well. Do you have a board structure, a board that makes way for ethics and integrity? We're talking about corporate values, growth, and trust, the big T. If we don't have trust in our economy, nothing is going to matter, because we have to trust that when we open a bottle of Pepsi, that nobody has tampered with it, that the water has been clean that went into making it. And this is why we have such a strong environmental control system in this country to ensure that these things are monitored. And all of these things then, ESG, DI can be embedded in different spaces depending on the aspect of DI that you want to pay attention to.
Okay, just to add on to what you're saying, Dr. Nelson, currently we all know that in the country, there's just a growing movement that's forcing organizations to really consider how they approach DEI and equity and inclusion. But what we really know, the need for DEI and inclusive workspaces and communities has not gone away, and it definitely will not go away. And so more than ever, we're all working to see how can we continue to keep our organizations compliant and also sustainable. And so that's where, you know, for me, I believe that SDGs comes in, and the ESG provides a powerful lens to reframe and strengthen DEI, particularly in today's complex environment. ESG doesn't replace DEI, it enhances and involves it. It enables us to really integrate DEI into the core business strategy rather than treating it as a separate initiative. First, you know, ESG encourages us to use DEI as a governance issue, which you're sharing. You know, sometimes leaders are directly accountable for pushing that governance issue. That also means that DEI becomes part of the boardroom agendas, right? The leadership evaluations and strategic planning for the organization for future years to come. Let's take, for instance, the S&P Global, for example. They use DEI scoreboards and scorecards right alongside their financial metrics. So in their meetings, they're talking about their financial status of the organization, but also thinking about where are they in terms of DEI. This kind of integration ensures DEI isn't just talked about, but is tracked and managed. Secondly, we're seeing organizations shift the language around DEI without compromising the mission. You know, they're using terms like inclusive leadership, social performance, and belonging are being used, especially within the ESG strategies. Why? Because it allows DEI to stay goal relevant. It allows DEI goals to stay alive and move forward, even in politically charged environments. And let's be clear, this isn't about watering down DEI. It's about using language that builds bridges across stakeholders while maintaining a focus on equity. And third, ESG helps us connect DEI to broader issues such as environmental justice and community well-being. For example, when a company invests in clean air or solar energy in an under-resourced community, they're not just being green, you know, they're promoting equity. It's about seeing the intersections, who is most impacted, who benefits. These questions help us align social and environmental goals with DEI in a meaningful way. So what's the bottom line for us? You know, reframing DEI through an ESG lens makes it more resilient, strategic, and future focused. It moves DEI from being an isolated effort to a core part of our ethical infrastructure. It becomes values-driven, data-informed, justice-centered, and now that's how we build an organization where everyone thrives, not just today, but, you know, for the long term.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Smart. Your comments, especially regarding justice-centered approaches, is a great setup for our next topic on SDGs. So next slide, please. So let's engage the audience again with another poll. Please take time to respond to this question as we move into our SDG conversation. How does your organization currently incorporate DEI into its efforts to achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals? And we'll wait for the poll. All right. So the results show 44% DEI is not a focus in our SDG initiatives at this time. Okay, so we're hoping that you'll leave this webinar today with key takeaways on how to integrate these topics in your organizations. So let's move into the discussion. So panelists, could you please address how can organizations effectively align with SDGs to foster a more inclusive and sustainable corporate culture?
Sure. So let's discuss how organizations can align with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, especially SDG 11, 10, 11, and 12, to foster a more inclusive and sustainable corporate culture. But first, we really need to reframe or reconfigure, as Dr. Nelson is saying, DEI. DEI was never the finish line. It was always meant to be a critical milestone on the journey toward justice and sustainability. Now we have the opportunity to uplift and evolve it by integrating it into global frameworks such as SDGs and ESGs. So let's look at SDG 10, which focuses on reducing inequalities. And this is where DEI takes root. It's not just about hiring more diversely, it's about dismantling systemic barriers and ensuring equitable pay and creating pathways to leadership for underrepresented voices. And when companies align their work with ESG, it strengthens the S pillar, social pillar, measuring equity inside the organization and in the communities we serve and we touch. It becomes something we track, we report, and take action on, not just something we say we care about. Now let's focus in on SDG 11, which is sustainable cities and communities, which prompts us to consider the spaces we create, both physically and digitally. In our workplaces, so the question is, are our workplaces truly accessible? Are our supply chains and consumer experiences designed with inclusion in mind? You know, for companies, this goal is about investing in safe, welcoming, and sustainable environments, ones that uplift people rather than leave them behind or do harm. And so that includes everything from who's at the table in design meetings to how we build out our office spaces and online platforms. And then we have SDG 12, which is responsible consumption, production. This is where equity meets environment. Responsible consumption isn't just about reducing waste. It's about us thinking about who's paying the cost of the environmental harm. Often it's communities of color and low-income neighborhoods. When companies embed DEI into their environmental strategies, they're not just going green, they're restoring trust in communities that have been long impacted and overlooked. So how do we bring this all together? By aligning DEI with SEG and SDGs, organizations can demonstrate to employees, customers, and investors that equity isn't just a campaign, it's a core value. This alignment builds credibility, confidence, and most importantly, long-term trust. It becomes an integral part of the business model and strategic plan, shaping how companies lead, grow, and present themselves in the world. Now, let's bring this full circle and connect it to the Smart Futures framework. What I love about the Smart Futures framework, it's an approach that challenges us to stop viewing DEI as a program and start seeing it as a strategic approach for the future. The vivid storytelling helped me understand this deeply. It reminded me that inclusive innovation, designing systems that serve everyone, is how we truly become a productive, just, and prosperous societies. And to sum this all up, we can reframe and reconfigure DEI through the lens of ESGs, SDGs, and the Smart Futures framework, where we're not losing its essence, we're expanding it. We're not checking boxes anymore. We're building futures that are sustainable, equitable, flourishing, and deeply human-centered. And that's the kind of leadership, you know, we collectively need right now.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Nelson and Dr. Smart, for challenging our thinking today to become futurist thinkers. I really appreciate you joining us on today's presentation and for all the substantive and powerful insights that you shared. Before we move into Q&A, we would like the audience to participate one more time in another poll. So feel free to respond to this question. How do the SDGs influence your organization's DEI strategy? And this will provide great insights for the panelists and for Elation Communications as we seek to serve the association community. So feel free to respond, and let's see the response, please. Okay, results. Okay, so with 43%, the responses are not currently a formal part of our DEI strategy. Well, we appreciate the audience engagement today, and for joining us for this important topic. At this time, we'll open the floor for you all to ask questions. Please feel free to type your questions in the Q&A tab, and we'll go ahead and address them. Next slide, please. Okay, so Gigi, would you like to share with us the questions we received so far?
Sure. We have one person that asked, when ESG and DEI are terms that are being villainized in the current administration, do you have ideas on how to approach this?
I would like to take a stab at that. From personal experience. So back in the day when I was trying to push the agenda of diversity and equity in an organization where I was only me, basically, in my position, and it wasn't officially on the agenda of the organization, I was labeled all sorts of unpleasant titles, right? And so this is where story comes in, and the ability to use words that have many meanings comes in. One of the words I really like to use is high performance organization. Everybody really wants to be a high performance organization. They want to see themselves as high performance. And if you, again, it depends on the industry you're working in and if you're an association or a company member, but you really have to look at it from a lens of, at the end of the day, what is it the company wants? The company wants to get to a state of profitability and or productivity. And in order to do that, you simply must hire the best talent. You simply must have the most innovative mix of people at the table, because sometimes if you have the same people with the same perspective, you have what we have had happen in some situations where it's groupthink and you can't see. You literally have a bias that's embedded. You cannot see other perspectives. And then because you're not seeing a big enough universe, you're not able to make the best decision. So you have to start using terms around decision support. You have to start using about decision lens, decision targets, and those words in situations where you feel it will be unsafe to use the word you really want to use, you have to find substitute words that get you to actually say the same thing. So what is the word that the person you're trying to speak to who does no longer wants to hear DI, because that may not be something that they even want to do it in the first place, but you still believe it's a value. What is the thing that they value? And how can you use the framing, that the lens that they have to redefine it in the way words like woke have been redefined to match what other people need it to mean? So it's really a talent and a skill that has to be developed, but there is a way to do it. As I said, I like to begin with thinking about, at the end of the day, what is the future that person wants to live in? And if it is that future that they still want to be successful, then how can you have them see that the values of DI, whether you call it DI or not, are still going to be important for their success? We are, after all, an interdependent species.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nelson. And I also shared with the audience in the chat information about Elation's new modern workplace tech terminology guide. And that also will help you navigate with the compliant language on how to tell that story or in a reconfigured way around DEI. Okay, so next question, please.
Sure. This is a question for you, Jerrica. Will the first two session recordings be available?
Yes, they will be. We are in the process of packaging the recordings, and they will be live on the Elation Communications DIB branding webpage. And so we'll announce it when all the recordings are published and posted there. Meanwhile, I can share a direct link to anyone who wants it. So feel free to reach out to me at info@elationcommunications.com.
All right, thank you. And then we have another question. How can we continue this work when we can no longer use any DEI terms and no longer have an office?
That's an interesting, that's an interesting question. You mean you no longer have an office because you no longer have a job or the institution has gone away? I think your work is always going to be your work, right? And as somebody who is, I consider myself a change maker. I am, my personality type, my archetype is that of an advocate, caretaker. And in my instance, I go from local to global, right? Is that no matter where you place me, my values of how can I create space to have the most economic justice, the most social justice that it can be. And so if this is your work, if you really believe that this is the work you're meant to do, it doesn't matter what they call it. You're going to find a place to use your talents, to be of service, to stewardship, or to steward, to usher in this new future that we want. The point of the matter is we are at a political time where the reality is that we're being asked to go back to a time that for many people in the world was uncomfortable. And we see that all levels, at the national level, government to government, we see the rhetoric that is out there. And so as small people in this bigger space, we often ask, well, what can me, one person, do? And if you take away nothing from this conversation today, I really want people to take away the sense of being empowered, to know that as small as you are, your one voice, your one personality is a seed of hope that can be planted. And that's what my book talks about. Begin to see yourself as a change maker. The fact that you have this emotion is itself a signal of the change that's tried to be birthed into being, right? We want to have a world in which more people do better. That's the future that we're trying to birth into being. And we've come a long way. I mean, since the 12th century, the 11th century, the 15th century, the 18th century, and here we are, the 21st century, with the ability to clone people, the ability to splice the gene, the ability to put a person on the moon to live. That's our next grand adventure. And yet a part of humanity is still in the dark ages. And so those of us who already begun to see the light and want to emerge into that light have to see ourselves. And I think I look at the book one, but there are many other books out there, but my book is really for people who actually want to do something, not just think about it. I think the questions that you're going to be asking to answer, whether you're designing a product, a policy, a plan, whether you're working in the public sector, the private sector, in an NGO, whether even doing it just in your community as a volunteer. You are part, you're a citizen, you're a consumer, and you're what I call a communer, right? You're in a community. An association is a community. A church is a community, right? Whether you're a volunteer or paid. And so these are spaces in which you can bring all of who you are, and the part of you that says, I really want to do this work, is where I think you can find ways in still doing the work. That this kind of work, this DI work, this inclusion work, this social justice change work that you want to see to make the world a better place.
Yeah, I want to add to what you're saying, Dr. Nelson, because what I'm hearing and what I see is the work is the outcome, and the DEI is the outcome of what we're doing. So if we take a minute and, we're all wrestling with it and think about how are the systems in our organizations designed to support the outcome, we will still be accomplishing the DEI without using the words, right? And, sometimes we just need to take a step back. And for me, when I want to incorporate the SDGs, I think about the organization that I'm in and which one of those SDGs align to my organization's mission. And then from there, I will figure out what the work should be, not necessarily using the word DEI, for instance. For example, if I'm working with an organization and it's about education, I'm going to align with SDG number 4, which is quality education. And then I'll start asking those 5 questions within the Smart Futures framework to now make sure that my outcome is equitable without using the DEI terms per se.
Right. Thank you so much for really a powerful call to action. Before we wrap up, are there any other questions? Okay, so we'll advance to the last slide. And we'll close with these words. At Elation Communications, we've developed a 7-point DEI rebranding strategy that supports both compliance and continued impact. Our 7-point DEI rebranding strategy helps organizations comply confidently, engage meaningfully, and protect and evolve your brand identity. We would love to explore how we can support your organization's journey to becoming more inclusive, aligned, and impactful. So you can scan the QR code to visit our DEI Rebranding Service webpage to learn more. And again, I would like to give a big thank you to our esteemed speakers today and for all of you, audience, for your participation. And I'd like to invite you to join us for our 3rd webinar, Ethical Leadership, Compliance, and Impact in a Changing World, on May 8th from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thanks again for joining us today. And remember, DEI is a core business strategy to help future-proof your organization. Thank you so much.